right, welcome. This is the Grow to Amazing podcast. This is Tony Mays, and today I have a good friend of mine and a good friend of our families on today. And she's not on just because she's a great friend of the family. She also has an awesome story to tell, a story with a lot of challenges, a story of overcoming grief and overcoming mental illness. But she has really, when I met her 11 years ago, you would have never known that this was part of her story, just because it's something that it's an intensely personal thing that she's chosen now to bring out to the world, but it's something that has definitely shaped her life and has definitely brought her into this world. So Rebecca Stewart is probably my wife's best friend. She was our matron of honor for our wedding. She was the first person, I believe, that my wife called after our first date, and
Oh, can I
was
interject? I think I'm
sure.
responsible for you two getting together. So I'm just gonna praise myself at this moment.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, continue.
You told her not to be afraid to date an older guy. Is that what you told her?
Yeah, yeah. No, I told her it's okay to go on Match.com because that's how I found my husband.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
So, yep, her and her husband Montana have four
Hmm.
kids altogether. One boy that's in college, three
Yeah.
girls, and that has its own challenges, I'm sure. But the thrust of the story today is Rebecca's has a book out called Unbinding Love, and I'll put a copy of it. I'll put a screenshot up on the video as well. But she's a survivor of a traumatic childhood, a caretaker to her mother, and a cheerleader to those that can't see the light at the end of their caregiving tunnel. So she has had to take care of her mother, who's dealt with schizophrenia for as long as you can remember.
Hmm.
And can you just tell us, kind of start off a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I guess for me, my story starts around 7 years old when I first started noticing that my mom was acting different.
Hmm.
I lived with my mom. She was a single mom. My parents were divorced. I had a real minimal relationship with my dad. Like he would take me to the park once a month, take me to McDonald's. That was really all that I knew of my dad. And so mom and I, it was kind of like us against the world. And just like any child, you grow up and you don't know any difference. So my mom never held a job. She was pretty debilitated with her schizophrenia. And I just remember apartment getting really messy and she was kind of off in her own world and she was starting to enter into psychosis. And I remember one day she threw away all my books. And so I went to school and I told my teacher, I don't have any books because my mom threw them away. I must have done something wrong.
Hmm.
And shortly after, I was removed from that home. So that was kind of the beginning of, okay, maybe my life is a little bit different than most kids my
Hmm.
age, and processing what that meant
Yeah.
and experiencing the trauma of, it was always me and my mom. And then one day it wasn't. Just
Was
one
that
day.
did you go to foster care or with your dad?
Neither. Actually, I went to her parents at first. So my
Okay.
dad came
Okay.
and picked me up and dropped me off to his in-laws, and they were, separated. They actually, I never knew them to be together. They were technically divorced. They did eventually get divorced.
Hmm.
Um, but I lived with her parents in Stevens Point for all of second grade. I basically missed all of a grade because they didn't quite know how long it was going to take for my mom to come back.
Okay.
And they didn't know it at the time, but my mom was severely, severely mentally ill. It was going to take years for her to just kind of come back.
Hmm.
So, my grandma was going to raise me and grandpa, and they took me to a Catholic school. And I remember
And you
they,
weren't raised Catholic or
no.
anything like that,
So I
right?
was
So
raised in
yeah,
public school.
yeah.
And for anybody that knows the difference, it's like, it's kind of like walking through a prison. That's how it felt like to me. And so it was my grandma and my aunt and her sister, my great aunt, and the priest. And he
Hmm.
sits down and he says, "Well, everything looks great with Rebecca, but I just have a question. How long is she going to be here? Because kids will make friends and they'll adjust. And if she has to be uprooted right away, like within a month or two, that's not going to
Hmm.
be good for her." And my grandma says, "Oh, it's going to at least be 6 months." And her sister says, "Oh, at least a year."
Hmm.
And then he looks to me and he says, "What do you think?" And I go, "My dad's picking me up tomorrow."
In that ever optimistic, youthful, point of
I
view.
wasn't being disrespectful. I was just
Yep.
like, no, this isn't for me, thanks. And my grandma like gasped. She was like, oh, Father, she doesn't know, you know. And then we went home, and I remember I was too tall to reach the phone. So I stood up on a stool and I called my dad and I said,
Hmm.
Dad, you need to come and get me. It's time.
Hmm.
And so that, you know, it's just kind of a God thing. I just knew that I wanted to go back to Oshkosh and back to my dad. And I was very close with my dad's parents. And I don't really talk a lot about that, but I was very close with my grandma. And
Hmm.
she pretty much raised me during the time when my mom was away. So thankfully, I had angels around me
Yeah.
to love on me and to support me because it really felt like a death. I mean, I remember crying every night, missing my mom.
Hmm.
We were very close, and so it was a definite beginning of my grieving process. And then when she came back, she wasn't really herself. She was very different.
When was the first time you saw her after that initial?
So it's funny you asked that because I had a memory that I repressed. And it
Hmm.
was like last summer, we all as a family went to Mackinac Island.
Okay.
And you know how there's no cars in Mackinac Island, and it's just like you're taken around on a horse carriage. And I heard the clickety clock of the horse hooves on the pavement. And that night, you know, without even processing it, I had a dream that I was speaking in front of an audience about mental illness. And
Hmm.
I said, I was 8 years old when I first went to Winnebago Mental Health Institute. And then, like, I woke up and I went, oh my gosh,
Whoa.
I was 8 years old when I went
Hmm.
to Winnebago Mental Health Institute. And then, like a movie, it came back
Hmm.
that I went to go see her while she was still rehabilitating. So she was totally out of it. I
So
remember,
this was
like,
like a year after she had been initially committed, kind of a thing.
yes.
Yeah.
So she had been taken to Winnebago, transferred to Madison. She stayed at Madison for a very long time. I have over 1,000 notes from her stay at Madison that
Wow.
she was strapped in a chair in a room, and they would keep notes that today Elaine drank her own urine,
Oh
like
wow.
really bad stuff.
Hmm.
And she would like, she didn't know what she was doing. She would try to eat her nightgown, and, you know, she
Hmm.
was hysterical. And back then so they would try different meds, but they would have to restrain them.
Hmm.
And so she lived that life. And then eventually they knew she needed shock therapy. So she went back to Winnebago where they did the shock therapy.
Hmm.
And probably right before they did that is sometime I was introduced back to see her, and it was in the middle of summer. And I remember she was singing Jingle Bells, and her hair was like, it looked like she stuck a finger in a light socket. You know, she was just like running around, and I could see just through, like, I was out in the hallway because I think at the time staff was like, what do we do? There's a kid here.
Yeah.
And there was like a little slit of a window, and I could see like my beautiful mom just frailing around.
Hmm.
And then they let me in and they put me in like a room with her. And she looked at me and she just bawled. I mean, just like tears. She couldn't process, she couldn't talk. But when
Hmm.
she saw me, she cried and cried and cried. And in an attempt to kind of make things better, they picked me up and they put me in a horse driven carriage. And I went around the grounds being like toured by a little, I don't know, it was this guy riding, you know, like steering a horse. And then I even remember the conversation that they had told me that the horse was black and it was supposed to be a horse used in a wedding, and
Hmm.
the bride wanted a white horse. So they got this horse. And it was this whole story. And I was like, this did not happen. I
Yeah.
literally thought I was hallucinating it. So that morning from
Do you
my
remember? Do you remember
hotel,
what you were feeling though at the time? I mean, was it just?
yeah, I remember the question.
Yeah.
Who brought me to Winnebago when I was
Yeah.
7 years old? And why was I there? And why did I end up going in a horse ride? Like,
Hmm.
what? That
Yeah.
that can't be true. So I picked up the phone and I literally just called Winnebago Mental Health Institute and I asked for the historical it's like they have like a historical society or
Hmm.
historical department. And I talked to a really nice gal there and I said, do you guys used to have horse rides? She says, oh, yeah, we used to have our own gardens.
Hmm.
Back in the day, that's how they rehabilitated mentally ill, was through healthy foods and getting them outside.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of the end of that era, but they still had horses. And I was like, wow, that is the strangest memory that I have. And
Hmm.
kind of represents the struggle at that time for me, which was adapting to a new normal, that it was no longer me and my mom against the world. And now
Hmm.
it was entering into this new phase of, number one, accepting that my mom isn't my mom anymore. She's
Hmm.
different. She's
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
She's not talking like my mom. She looks like my mom, but, you know, and then also entering into life with my dad,
Hmm. So your
life in
dad
blend.
did eventually take you in then?
He did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that is, do you still find yourself missing a lot of the memories of your childhood?
Yeah. And I think as I have my own kids and experience memories and new memories with them, it kind of
Hmm.
makes me stop and go, what was I doing when I was this age?
Hmm.
And kind of identifying and grieving all over again that some of those milestones were missed, or,
Yeah.
I was in the chaos of adjusting to, adapting to my mom and her illness,
Sure.
um, missing out on stuff, birthday parties. I wasn't in taking swimming lessons and golf lessons. And, I look at my kids and how they live, and it
Dance
was
and
a
all that
simple
stuff.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was different.
Was your dad running his own business back then as well? So he was probably
Yeah.
pretty busy with that also.
Yep. My dad was, yep. He still is a business owner and still working. And he was definitely involved in that. And so, yeah, it was hard, definitely, from having a full-time mom that was there all the time.
Hmm.
I explained it in my book. My mom was sweet and she was nurturing. And then I kind of moved into a household where I remember the first night, like my dad didn't know how to tuck me in. He was like, all right, see you in the morning. And I was like, this is when we say prayers and this
Yeah.
is when you tell me you love me. Okay, let's start over.
If you want to read me a story, that's probably okay too, or something like that, right? So, yeah.
It wasn't like that with him at all. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was a transition.
Okay. So, how did that affect you going through like middle school and high school? Were you like overachiever? Were you get
Yeah.
in trouble, that kind of thing? Trying to
No, I
compensate?
was a total perfectionist,
Of
Tony, which is
course.
where it leads into adult life. Total perfectionist. I was a good student. Most of my teachers did not know about my struggle at all.
Hmm.
In fact, I have one or two teachers that were very impactful in my life that I've recently reached out through text message and just said, "Hey, you made a difference in my life." I had a first grade teacher that I called and cried to. And she was just kind of shocked, and it really blessed her because she had no idea
Hmm.
how much she had impacted me. And I think teachers are so underappreciated. During a
Hmm.
time when things were so unstable in my life, I definitely had teachers and angels that stepped
Hmm.
in. So,
I'm assuming you didn't. Oh, so the Catholic school was in Stevens Point, but once you went back to Oshkosh, was that regular public school
mhm.
teachers? Yeah.
Actually
Okay.
went back to the same school,
Okay.
and it was a God thing. I had the same teacher in first grade as I did in second grade. So
Hmm.
Mrs. Benarek, she was one of those angels, and she was the one that I called recently. And so if she's listening to this, she's an absolute angel. And
Hmm.
I know before she retired, she didn't feel that way because of everything that's changing in the public school system. She felt almost like she
Yeah.
had failed public school and had failed her kids because of all the stipulations that are put in place on teachers and the difficulty of really maintaining a classroom with
Hmm.
integrity. And she had felt like she had failed.
Yeah.
So when I called her, she was just like, thank you. Oh my gosh. And I said, you hugged
Yeah.
me every day before class. And sometimes that was the only hug I ever received,
Yeah.
because I would come home and my mom was psychotic.
Hmm.
I lived like that for months before I was taken out of the house. And that's really the trauma that I experienced is hunger, poverty.
Hmm.
I still to this day cannot drink powdered milk because my mom was on food stamps. So we didn't have regular milk. We had powdered milk. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why anybody would drink powdered milk, but we had that. And I remember like eating pea soup for a week because that's what we
Oh,
had.
yeah.
So I still cannot eat pea soup. And
Sure.
so, yes, I was lucky to have angels in my life and people that kind of helped me smooth along into the middle school, high school age, which was the first part of my life where I really At that point, it was like denial. I did not
Yeah.
want anybody to know I was different. I did not want anybody to know the truth about myself, which was
Mm-hmm.
the lie that I believed that I was damaged goods, that I
Mm-hmm.
was, no matter how hard I tried, I was still Elaine's daughter and I was
Mm-hmm.
still impacted by mental health. And
Did you
so I
think she
very,
was going to rub off on you or something like that, or that the
yeah, I mean, I felt
yeah.
like we were one family unit.
Mm-hmm.
And every time there was a family reunion, I was reminded of that we were different. And most of
Yeah.
the time she wasn't there because she was in the hospital.
Yeah.
My mom would have 2, 3 hospitalizations a year. So
Mm-hmm.
her mental illness was so severe that she literally got lost in her apartment in her 40s.
Wow.
Like she
Mm-hmm.
just would get lost inside her apartment. She wrote journals about it. It's hard to understand and wrap your brain around it because most of us kind of take that part for granted. We can get up
Mm-hmm.
and get dressed and we can go to work. But for some of us that are in between, and it might be depression or anxiety where today's a bad day and that you just can't function.
Yeah.
For her, it was like that every single day. But
All
then it
day.
was
Yeah.
the paranoia. Oh, my neighbor thinks that I'm doing this, this, and this. I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm getting a message off the TV. I think that so and so is going to commit suicide. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just this constant
Yeah.
thing that played in her head, and it prevented her from living a successful and happy life.
Yeah.
And so that was hard to witness. But then there were also beautiful things that she did too that I talk about in my book too.
Yeah, yeah. So when did once you got close to graduating high school, what did you look at your path? What did you want your path to be coming out of high school?
Yeah, so high school was like the end of the bad years. I think it kind of went into a little bit too of early marriage. It's kind of like when you're newlywed and you're just kind of trying to figure it all out and you make a lot of
Hmm.
dumb mistakes.
Yeah,
For me, it
that never happened.
was,
That never happened to me. So yeah.
well, that works with caregiving too. So when you become a caregiver, so I had become a legal guardian to my mom at age 21. So in college is when it really picked up for me that I had to step up to the plate and be responsible for my mom.
What kind of a shock to you was that though, that you had to be the one making all the decisions?
Total shock. I had
Yeah.
no idea. I had no idea. Like it was like one day I got a letter in my college dorm, like the matter of Elaine, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to go to this. I'll leave Madison and go to Oshkosh, and I'll sit in the hearing. And um, I don't think my mom was there. I just remember like all these attorneys and people, and they deemed her mentally incompetent. And then they saw me sitting there and they said, okay, is anybody here, with family? We've got one brother on the phone. Okay, who's going to be guardian? And they all looked at me and I was like, hi. Yeah, I had no idea. And then they were like, okay, her daughter is 21. Yep, she's in college. Okay, perfect. Check. And I walked out of there and I was like, what just happened?
Yeah.
So I mean, that was literally like I was like, oh, can I, I got to get back to my friends and
I
there's
got
a
a
party
party
this
party to
weekend,
go to tonight. Yeah. But my mom's responsibility is all in my hand. Yeah, I can imagine that being a complete shock. And just what do you do
And then two
next?
months later, I got a bill for $300,000 in my name. And I was like, I remember just thinking like, I'm never going to pay this bill off. Like
Yeah.
I'm going to live just totally in debt the rest of my life. But that was wrong. And I had to get an attorney. And that attorney was like, nope, I'll just write a letter. She's an SSI recipient. You're not
Hmm.
financially responsible. So there was a lot of early mistakes and things that I learned from experience because no one writes a book on
Yeah.
how you take care of someone like this and
Yeah.
how you navigate through Social Security, medical assistance, Medicaid, finding a social worker, working with your doctor,
Yeah.
helping someone that's on antipsychotics that doesn't want to be on them. They don't want to
Hmm.
be on meds because they think they're fine and they're really
Hmm.
off in la la land.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of getting lots of phone calls from her landlord that she was streaking naked in her apartment. And it was becoming really obvious that I was going to have to step up. I was going to have to either take care of her myself or
Hmm.
find someone willing to take care of her.
Hmm. And I mean, it sounds to me like it was getting to the point where you probably wanted to take care of her yourself.
Yeah.
to get back to the two of you again, kind of a thing. But did you realize you couldn't?
Yeah. So at that point, I was pretty scared of my mom.
Yeah.
My mom had a really strong personality. She, her personality without mental illness is like cheerful and bubbly, and she was attractive and blonde, and that's how
Hmm.
she got landed my dad. I mean, she was like a knockout, bubbly personality. But then when mental illness hit her, it made her paranoid. It made her turn inward. It made her stay away from her friends and family and all that. So it changed her.
Hmm.
And then in her later years, it was like mental illness doesn't get better with age necessarily. That's a hard thing to accept, but as we age, we have to all kind of accept that, right? Like our bodies
Hmm.
and our minds, they work a little bit slower. And so for her, that was kind of the phase of clinging to independence, which if it were me, I would be the same way. She
Hmm.
was clinging to her independence, but she was also like kind of scary about it. And also, you enter into psychosis. So she would get bizarre thoughts in her head, and there was nothing you could do to get those thoughts out. So I was kind of this young, meek, like perfectionist people pleaser. And so instead of dealing with things head on like I can now as an adult, I was really just kind of terrified of her. And I was like, how can we like hit the easy button and just skip
Yeah.
forward? And the first assignment that I had was to move her into a CBRF, and her social worker helped me with that and called and said, "This is what she needs. She needs this placement." And
Which is
so,
is a community-based rehab facility? Did I get that
residential
right?
facility. Yep,
Residential?
it's
Okay.
exact. Yep, it's a house that's run by at the time it was a family, and they had nursing staff there all the time to help you with your meds and cook and clean for you, and kind of
Hmm.
like assisted living, but it looks like a home. And um, my mom had been living in her apartment, her low income apartment, for 10 years. So
Hmm.
she had a lot of stuff in that one bedroom, teeny tiny apartment. And, being young and naive, I was like, I'll do it in a day. I'll just,
Yeah.
I'll just open her apartment and I let everybody come in. And now I like think, oh, I got rid of her dishes. I got rid of family heirlooms. And I was like, I remember just kind of winging it, giving
Yeah.
away furniture because I couldn't fit it in her room. And I made her a
Hmm.
really cute room. And this whole time I sent her with my 93-year-old grandma, her mom. So
Yeah.
her mom took care of her for a week so that I could move her into assisted living. And then I didn't tell her, and I picked her up and I was like, took her to the park and I said, Mom, your apartment's gone and you have a new place to go to. And I had taken her there. It wasn't like I
Hmm.
totally,
Just
like,
dropped it on her.
yeah, I took her there and she
Yeah.
liked it. And she said, yeah, I'll live when I'm 80. So, there was,
Yeah.
again, everybody wants to live independently. And I think
Hmm.
when you're a caregiver, when you have parents that are aging and you have to make a decision for them,
Hmm.
it's incredibly difficult. And
Yeah.
when you're young, you don't have that experience and you don't. So it was very scary for me. It was,
Yeah.
that's when I met my husband. So we were dating and he remembers me just kind of going, oh, like I couldn't sleep for a week. I was so nervous about it. But she actually was a trooper. Like
Yeah.
she kind of glided in. And I remember her saying, like, this is a princess room. I love it. And I slept with her the first night because I was worried for her.
Yeah.
Um, and then so since then, she's been receiving help and been pretty good about that. So
Did you, you'd mentioned you met Montana while you were in college and while you were going through all this. Did you have a hard time making friends during college and things like that or not?
yes,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I had a hard time, but I was so busy and removed from the college experience. I know
Yeah.
one of the questions I get is, "Oh, you're a Badger fan, like football." I went to one Badger football game. And it wasn't my idea, and I just felt so removed from the culture because I was driving on the weekends to see my mom. Most of my college experience, she was living in that apartment, but I remember
Hmm.
going through and I would wash all her clothes. I would take out rotting food out of the fridge. For many, many years, she ate the same foods over and over again because dementia was settling in,
Hmm.
probably from the shock therapy and things that she had experienced with her brain.
Yeah.
So I was living life like a 40-year-old and I was in my early
Yeah.
20s. And
Yeah. So you had a
so,
lot of surface relationships, but you didn't have the time to get to know anybody and most kids that age probably couldn't
mm,
handle that that scene or that, that
Yeah.
much emotion or something like that, I'm guessing. How did you and Montana met on Match as well, since
Yes,
you're
we
the one that
did.
encouraged Jill? How did
Yeah.
that go initially? How long did it take before you could tell him everything?
Oh
Can you
gosh.
can you share that, or do you want to share that? If you don't want to,
I'm
that's okay
actually
too.
I'm actually a person that shares. That's why
Okay.
I have a podcast where I talk about suicide, mental health, sex, all of it. I shared everything with him on the first date, but
Hmm.
it's a little bit like,
He
oh
came back
yeah,
for a
this
second date then, so
no, right?
yeah.
I think I was well, we had emailed, so I kind of like kept him at a distance. He had to work a little bit. So we didn't meet for 3 months
Okay.
before we kind of exchanged emails, and then I went on
Was
a
this when he was
cruise.
traveling a lot and things like that for work?
Yeah, so he was working in Madison,
Oh, he was.
and
Okay. All right.
and he was working at the Milwaukee Stockyards in Madison, which is
Okay.
weird. And then I was in school in Madison. So that's how he found my picture, and then he
Hmm.
lost it and had to go back. And he has this whole story about how he first emailed me. I was always very honest with him about it. That's all I can say. And I think that in terms of my trauma and everything I had been through, I didn't tell him fully everything until years into our marriage because
Hmm.
I was still processing them as well.
Yeah.
And he had his own layer of stuff. It was just different from my stuff. He
Okay.
had parents that were still married. I had parents that were divorced. He had a
Hmm.
single family growing up. I had a blended family.
Yeah.
But then he had his own, everybody has something. So I would say that he had a high level of compassion for me. And
Yeah.
then I did for him. It was just different.
Yeah.
So from the beginning, we clicked. Like
Yeah.
I know by the third date, I knew I was marrying him. And I think after 8 months, we were engaged. So yeah.
And then when was your wedding? Good. If you engaged at 8 months, you were married at what?
Well,
Like a year?
2006, July.
2006. Okay.
So I had graduated college in 2004. So
Okay.
it was pretty quick. We had a year-long engagement and um yeah, so
Okay. And then the girls started. So your mother, she was in the assisted living type facility. When did you have to transition her to full-time care facility? When did
mhm.
that happen?
So she had some pretty good mental stability during that time, but she had problems with her teeth,
Mm,
which I talk about in the book. She had refused to go see a dentist. She just didn't want to go. So I would drive her to get her teeth cleaned and stand out in the snow, pregnant. Mom, come on, we got to go get your teeth cleaned. Becky, I am not going. I am not getting, they're not going to do it. And so all her teeth rotted. And it was a real problem because this was kind of one of the first lessons where I had to, as guardian, make a decision.
yeah.
And it was slightly illegal because I had to find an orthodontist that would pull all her teeth out without her knowing it.
Mm.
Yes. And it was one of the best, it was the best surgeon. And I had a friend that knew him and we explained the situation. So I got her to go thinking it was a consultation and she wanted her teeth to be whiter. So I said, okay, we're going to go and talk about getting you whiter teeth. Let's go in. And so she laid in the chair and they knocked her out and they pulled all her teeth out and gave her dentures in a day.
Wow.
And she woke up and like blood was dripping out of her mouth and she goes, hey, let's go out and have some breakfast. And she had like no idea, what had
Hmm.
happened. And so then I have to explain to her and I'm like, come on, let's get in the car. And I said, we're going to go back. And um, remember how you always wanted white teeth? Now you
Hmm.
have them, but they come in and out.
Yeah.
And she was like, I am not talking to you. Like she figured it out and she didn't talk to me for 3 months.
Wow.
Fair
Yeah.
enough. Okay. So it was, I didn't want her to have heart disease. I didn't want her to, when your teeth start to rot, you can get really
Yeah.
sick. Well, then from that, she ended up with the spiked white blood cell count. And that's a big problem when you're on Clozaril. So that's the medicine she's on. So they switched her to Seroquel, which is a sister drug. And then she got sick mentally. So she started getting psychotic and she went to Mendota Mental Health Institute, which is
Hmm.
one of the best geriatric facilities you could ever have a loved one go to. Gets a
Hmm.
lot of bad rap. Ed
Yeah.
Gein was like living there. So a lot of people hear it and they think, never, I would never let my mom or dad go there. But I have to give them a shout out that they have the best doctors, the best
Hmm.
psych nurses. My mom had so much
That's a tough
fun
job. I
there.
can't imagine doing that job, but personally,
Oh,
yeah,
no. When you walk in, it's a little scary. I'm not going to
yeah,
lie. Like you have your own room, but you have no bathroom. You have to like bang on the door to go to the bathroom. It sounds awful. It looks like, I mean, it is. It's a building from the 1800s.
hmm,
But to give you an idea of how well they got her not only back on her Clozaril, they got her rehabilitated, but they gave her her own room with music and she listened to oldies. And when she had to leave, she didn't want to because she had adapted to I live here and help others. You know,
hmm,
she was like washing counters and she had a sense of purpose there and she had maintained friendships with all the nurses. So when
hmm,
she left, they all cried and I had
yeah,
to move her into a new place,
yeah,
you know, and so I just when I talk about Mendota, like I've left reviews, they're
hmm,
amazing there. They are experts there in mental health.
hmm,
And so then I had to move her to her hometown, Stevens Point, because they didn't have any housing in Oshkosh. And that's another thing I'll talk about is the lack of housing for people that are in between living independently and needing help. We
hmm,
just don't have enough CBRFs, facilities, that type of thing. So at the time, there was no option. So I couldn't have her come to La Crosse. It was a different county. And
hmm,
somehow Portage County accepted her. But she was still under Winnebago County. This is another kind of thing I don't need to mention,
yeah,
but there's a lot of politicalness against which county is going to pay the bill for her because she's
yeah,
so expensive.
yeah,
So Winnebago paid for her to live in Portage County for like 8 years or something. And
well,
found a really nice place for her, but it was hard for me to visit. So the
hmm,
last stage of her life was coming here to La Crosse and getting her close to family.
yeah,
And that has been a very tough phase as well because her body, physically and mentally, she's 78 years old now. So
hmm,
she's not able to hold conversations anymore. Some days I get a little glimpse of her, but
yeah,
it's
and
mostly
then
like loving
COVID
someone with
doesn't,
Alzheimer's. Yep.
yeah, COVID doesn't help either. So, yeah.
No.
So how have you, I'm the stress levels for you going through all this? How have you dealt? I mean, how has that affected your family? How has that affected you, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so I suffer from anxiety, and dealing with this every day is a heavy burden.
Yeah.
And some days I'm like, it's just like anybody. Some days I'm ready to take it on. I'm ready to go to her care conference. I'm ready to make decisions. I'm going to visit her. I'm going to talk to her. Other days I'm just like, Lord, I can't handle this. I need you to take care of her.
Yeah.
I need to focus on myself. And there was this constant battle between how do I know when I need to step in or how can I know to kind of let this go and surrender.
Hmm.
And that was the first realization for me that number one, I needed a faith because I needed
Hmm.
God to take some of this for me.
When did
And
what year was this that you really felt started to feel that? Do you know?
well, I know recently it was when we left our Lutheran church and went to First
Hmm.
Free. It was
Yeah.
a big transition.
Oh
I
yeah.
think it started before then because I
Yeah.
think
You were
when we
needing
went to
it.
the when we went to the Lutheran church, you know, we were lit up at the time for that church too. We were baptizing our kids and going to
Hmm.
church every Sunday, but we wanted to live an active life for Christ. We
Yeah.
wanted to start engaging and we were interested in what that would look like. And so I started going to like women's conferences, Christian conferences, and I
Hmm.
started really actively praying for my mom and the situation and praying for myself that I knew I wasn't enough to deal with all of it. And I also was dealing with daily migraines. I was a mess, you know, emotionally. And my husband bared a lot of that for me because he knew that that was just the reality of my life was that I had been through a lot. And then I was also had this like epiphany in my 30s about the sexual abuse that I experienced growing up that I had kind
Hmm.
of tucked away like under the rug somewhere that happens to a lot of people. It's no big deal. Well, then I started, you know, I think it's a process of having your own children and they
Yeah.
hit that age and you go, well, oh, and I was that age, you know, I was going to mental wards and doing this and this and this. And with the sexual abuse, that kind of hit me that I need to process this. So
From your mother or from another person in the family or?
Yeah, not my parents, another
Okay.
person in the family. I actually had two abusers that
Yeah. Mm.
kind of at different times that I had experienced,
So
yeah,
more
being
more
violated.
repressed memories kind of coming back
Mhm.
to give you more trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just kind of
Just when you
like,
need it, just when you needed it the most, right? Yeah.
but God is so amazing. He gives
Yeah.
it to you like when you're ready for it, you know?
Hmm.
For me, I was starting to figure out the caregiving stuff. I was still working at it. Obviously, no one is going to do it perfectly, especially with kids and a marriage, and you're kind of balancing all those things. For me, it was, yeah, like he presented it to me, and then I was like, okay, Lord, I can process this. I can pray about this, and told my husband about it. Like I had
Hmm.
never said that that had happened, so I had to really process that, and it was just love and compassion. So I was really grateful for that. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about that other than that, it's a major like thing that I'm still dealing with even today that,
Yeah.
God's got to take some of that for me. And
Do you think
um,
it's something you'll talk to the girls about eventually?
yes, I really actively try to work hard to talk to them about things like sex and
Hmm.
like abortion and like things that I want my kids to know so that they understand that they're not like presented to the world and then they're like, Mom, you didn't tell me about any of this stuff. So
Hmm.
I think that's one of the maybe assumptions when you homeschool, because we homeschool, is that, oh, we're going to like shelter our kids and put them in a
Yeah.
bubble.
Yeah.
And I actively don't want that. My
Yeah.
kids know a lot about mental health. They've kind of, inherited a
They've seen it.
passion
Yeah.
for it. They've
Yeah.
seen it.
Yeah.
They know that they have a grandma that is really sick and she loves them, but she just is limited. And then they have another grandma that can do anything. And
Yeah.
so, what a blessing that they have both, that they can see that and learn a lesson in
Hmm.
life. So yeah.
Hmm. So you decided a couple years ago that you needed to, had you always done things like journaling or anything like that to try to get your
Yes.
thoughts out?
I started journaling when I was in the third grade. My dad read it in the sixth grade and he found it and was like teasing me. And I said, give me back my damn journal. Like it was like the first time I swore because I was so mad at him. It was really cute stuff. Like I
Yeah.
have a crush on Joey G, like um, so I started writing at an early age. And then when I was an adult, and even early on in my marriage, I journaled as a way to let it all out so I could sleep at night and not worry about things.
Hmm.
And that has been really healing for me. I think I just adore the writing process, and it's a discipline and a skill.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, one
What?
day the
Oh, go ahead. Go
story,
ahead.
as you know, is we were in Alpha. So at First Free, we had signed up for Alpha and we wanted to make new friends at church. And we also
Hmm.
wanted to, again, continue on our faith journey and find out more about Christ and why
Hmm.
he came and what's the message. And in that course, they take you through a Holy Spirit night where you just listen to music and you get quiet and you just listen to the Lord and what,
Hmm.
everybody has a different experience. Like some people, they're like, nothing happened, or some people they laugh, or some people they cry. And I heard it in my soul that God wanted me to write a book about my mom.
Hmm.
And I even had this conversation. It went like this: No, Lord, I can't do it. I'm homeschooling. What? No one's going to want to read this stuff? No. And then he was like, get your kids involved. This can be
Hmm.
a homeschool lesson. This can be a family thing.
Hmm.
And so then I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to do it. The Lord asked me to do it. So I'm going to do it.
No, he's telling you that you need to do it, kind of a thing, right? And this was a couple years ago, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
2019 was about when I
2019.
really decided that I was going to do it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I can talk about that process if you want, if you're
Sure.
interested.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
So I had a friend who wrote a book and she was like, okay, this is how I wrote a book. And it's a school called SPS. So it's self-publishing school.
Hmm.
And you sign up and you pay $4,000 to enter the program. I don't know if that's what it is now. It's a
Mhm.
little bit of an investment. The way I saw it is it's like taking a class. So I want to learn how to write a book. I want to learn the processes of doing it. And they show you in like a course how to do it.
Mhm.
Um, and then they take you through each thing, and you have a Facebook group. So you have other people going through it as well, and they're kind of cheering you on. And they tell you you can write a book in 3 months. And
Mhm.
so I signed up for that. And it took me longer than that because I was homeschooling and doing
Yeah.
10 other things, taking care of my mom, all that. So I would say the process was a 2-year project that actively took about 8 months for me to really publish. And
Do you think you would have gotten it done without going through SPS?
no,
No.
no one knew who I was.
Mhm.
I didn't have a platform. I wasn't on social media, not in a professional way. So it was really my first act of, yes, I'm going to do this. I will publish. And
Mhm.
so for anybody who really is serious, and maybe someone's listening now that they have a message or they want to share something, you
Mhm.
can do it. It takes the actual active decision of, yep, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do it.
Did you have to start to treat it like a job almost though too, that you had to
Yes,
dedicate
it
yourself
had
to
to
it?
be
Yeah.
priority. And it was no coincidence. I had just read a book. It's like Just One Thing by Gary Keller. I think he's the famous realtor, that the Keller
Oh,
Realtor
okay. Okay.
Realty.
Sure. Sure.
Um, he wrote a book, Just One Thing, or The One Thing, which really just the takeaway of the book is you can't disperse yourself in 20 areas or you're never going to be great at one thing.
Mhm.
Multitasking is actually not good for you. So
Yeah.
I am the queen at multitasking. I, talk on my phone, I'm got kids over here, and it's really a downfall. So I had to retrain myself, and I actually had a conversation with the Lord. I said, okay, Lord, I'm not a morning person. So if you get me up at 5 a.m., I will write the book for you. I will get it out. And every morning he did. And I had a calendar. They teach you
Mhm.
this in SBS. Like every morning, after you write for 20 minutes, you just exit off your calendar and then you go along your day. And before
Mhm.
you know it, you have chapters written. And so the active
Cool.
phase was about 3 months.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. How did that help you with your healing journey, getting some of those words out onto paper?
Very healing. It
Yeah.
was very healing. And
What? How so?
Um, processing all these memories from childhood that I had shoved under a rug somewhere because I wanted everyone to know I was perfect and,
Mhm.
perfectionist, that type of thing. And it was really healing to accept those parts of myself, my childhood, my mom, and
Mhm.
also identify that she was actually really an amazing individual, that she went above and beyond her diagnosis. She didn't let
Mhm.
that keep her in a corner, although she was getting lost inside her apartment. At
Mhm.
the same time, before that, she went and got a teaching degree. She was extremely brilliant. It's kind of like that movie, A Beautiful Mind, where they show like they're just so astronomically bright, but they can't,
Mhm.
there's an element to that, to schizophrenia. They are bright and they're like ahead of their time. And so my mom was like that. And I think all of that and processing that in the end was like, God gave me this gift.
Kind of wrapped it
It
up.
was
Yep.
an
Wrapped it all
incredible
up into a,
struggle.
yeah.
Yeah, but God gave me the gift. Like,
Mhm.
I get to choose to look at the beauty in everything of this. Like,
Mhm.
why, Lord? Why is there mental illness? Why did my mom have to have it? And, you start answering those questions. Well, it was like the fast track to compassion. It was the
Yeah.
fast track to surrendering my life to Him.
Mhm.
And I think where I got also with that is as I was on Facebook, I
Mhm.
remember I've been on schizophrenia.com for like 10 years. And I offer advice to people that are new to the schizophrenic walk. And one of the caregivers had posted and said, are there any other carers here who want to commit suicide? And everyone jumped on and was like, here's a number you can call. And I just knew it. I was like, this is the reason why I need to talk more about mental health and talk about what I've learned, because being a caregiver is such a heavy burden and it's
Mhm.
scary. And many of us that are helping our loved ones with mental illness have mental illness ourselves.
Yeah.
We all have some element of it. And I think that was the real pivotal moment for me. It was like, okay, I've got to figure this out in a way that I can present it in a book that people can read it and relate. They can hear the stories and go, yep, my life's been chaotic.
Hmm.
And then I talk about the 4 pillars with it, which is grace, faith, grace, surrender, and hope.
Hmm.
And really all in anyone's life, you can take that and,
Yeah.
you can apply it to your life. But if you are a caregiver, if you are taking care of yourself and someone else, you really need to hone in on that, because if you don't, like on the airplane, if you don't give yourself oxygen first, you can't
Hmm.
help someone else.
Was that
And
a big struggle for you? Was taking care of yourself first?
absolutely. It
Yeah.
still is. It still is. My kids get fed the most beautiful lunches, and it's 3 o'clock and I haven't eaten lunch. It happened yesterday. Okay. I am still dealing with this. And why? Why can't I say, I'm going to have cake for lunch? I'm going to, like, why do I
Yeah.
deny myself?
Hmm.
But it's really hard to retrain your brain.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And I would imagine also the turning of the book into something to give help to another is also part of that healing journey, and kind of taking the next step with it, transforming it.
Yeah. So the book hit bestseller in 3 categories, I think
Congratulations.
within the first launch. And the launch was, so also, I'll talk a little bit about spiritual attack because it's real.
Hmm.
I went through such a spiritual attack 3 months before the book launched that I had to pray every day. I had to protect myself. It was like I was getting migraines. Things went wrong with the formatting. There's all these
Hmm.
things that is kind of behind the scenes when you write a book and you publish, and getting a team together. But I have to say, through that, I pushed through it because I knew that Satan didn't want that book to get out. God
Yeah.
wanted it out for
Yeah.
him. It was his book. And the beauty of it, there was one night where I was up all night. I was just completely, this sense of worry, like, first off, who the heck am I? Who's going to really learn from this message? Who's going to really want to
Mm.
read this stuff? Like, it was, and it's a little bit vulnerable because I'm talking
Mm.
about myself, and
Yeah.
I don't like that.
All these
I'm doing
intensely
the,
personal stories. Yeah.
yes,
All that.
I'm doing the
Yeah.
opposite of what I've done my whole life, which is I've hidden and tried to show everybody I'm perfect. Like you said, 11 years ago, people see me in festival. They're like, oh, she's got life perfect. She's got these cute little kids.
Yep.
No, actually, I'm in hiding. Okay. So this was the first, like, this is who I am. This is my story. And it was like crippling. And then I remember getting up, I barely slept. I checked my email, and it's somebody that I know through my mom's nursing home that I've never had a relationship before, but she
Hmm.
signed up to be on my launch team. And she was like, your book did this for me. Like,
Hmm.
I have goosebumps going through this in my life. This has applied to me.
That's
Your
awesome.
section on suicide applies to me. So I like threw that in last minute. I'm like, I'm just going to talk a little bit about suicide and how to talk to your loved ones about it. And it was just kind of like God just said, like, put it in, and that was her thing. She was like, I'm dealing with that in my family.
Hmm.
And I just had tears. I was like, okay, Lord, this is it. This is why you wanted this out. And it's
Yeah.
not about me. And I'm just going to move out of the way. So then we hit bestseller in 3 categories. I've had people that I don't know that
Hmm.
are like, thank you for talking about this.
Hmm.
So I do think it's powerful. It's obviously not clinical. I'm not going to tell
Yeah.
you what meds to take or anything like that. It's really more of a book for people who are loving on someone with mental illness, so
Hmm.
that they're not suicidal like that
Hmm.
poster was on boards that I had read. I just felt like God was saying that he loves caregivers, and that if you're listening to this and you are taking care of someone, it could be that you're a parent. It could be
Hmm.
that you have a elderly parent that now you're in charge of. It could be that you're in healthcare and you're a nurse.
Yeah.
Like, God has a heart for caregivers. You've been given this blessing. It's such an honor, and it's difficult. I
Yeah.
think
No, it's
it's
one of the
not
hardest
all
jobs.
rosy,
Yeah.
and when you are in that situation, other people look to you to see, are you positive about it? Are you complaining about it? It can be very easy to stay in a victim mentality.
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. So
Mhm.
what does and let me just talk quick. So just I think I mentioned it before. I'll put a picture up on the video too. The book is Unbinding Love. You can get that on Amazon. You can either get it paperback or Kindle and get it delivered either way that works for you. Rebecca's got a
Mhm.
podcast called Cheering Past Challenges where she talks
Yep.
about all of this in much more detail than we could go into today. But one last question, what does your typical day look like right now? I mean, what's your new normal?
Yeah. Yeah. So right now, it's giving God the first moment I wake up. And I talk about it in my book. It's my level of self-care. So I know that if I don't get up and come to the Father, read my Bible, give myself that time to process my day, it's not going to go well. And
Hmm.
so it's really living out the advice that I've given, which is
Hmm.
difficult. Some mornings I sleep in and then I have to run kids to the dentist. And, and I think that's the beauty of it is when you're an author, you're not an expert. You're just
Yeah.
saying, I've been through this. I know the struggle. And I just know that when I take time for myself, I'm a better mom. So
Hmm.
I try to do that every day, whether it happens or not. Totally, it's a struggle, but I would say that I actively meet God during the day and the morning. I teach my kids, I homeschool them. I love that time with them. I'm a stickler to a schedule. We do the same subjects beginning to end. We finish school, then it's activities
That's that
and
perfectionist mindset coming through, right? So,
totally. Kids are not getting out of math tests. They have to do
yeah.
them. Um, yeah, it's like an acceptance of
Yep.
myself
Yep.
that that's okay.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. What about the rest of your day? Family time, husband time.
Yeah, it's really like I have weekly things that I keep in check so that I'm mentally sane. So Tuesday's my day. My husband watches the kids and I'll golf or get together with friends or go out to eat. And then
Hmm.
Thursday is his day. Friday has typically been date night. Even through COVID, we have stuck to our dates.
Awesome.
Sometimes it's just going out for nachos and playing cards.
Well, that works too. So,
Um,
and I
I
think that's one thing people don't think about a lot with marriage is how much work you actually have to put into it to make it to make it work.
if you're not working at it, it ain't
Yeah.
working. That's just, and I think we know this, right?
Yeah.
Like, we don't have a
Absolutely.
perfect marriage. No marriage is perfect. You're going to have hangups. And it was an emotional year. Let's be honest. There was a
Yeah.
lot of emotions going on. So you're going to feel that internally and a lot of questions. Your spouse may not have adjusted to the pandemic like you have. Like, we had a little bit of, my husband was like, I'm not going to wear a mask. And I was like, yes, you will. And so will everybody you work with, so there was a little bit of,
Yes. Yeah. A little more leeway. He owns his own business, so
yeah.
he can try to do those things, but yeah, then
Yeah.
that's where you have to have a heart-to-heart
So we
talk.
did marry. I actually had to go a little bit more lenient and he had to go a little bit more careful. So we had to meet each other and that
Yeah.
is so important. And I get emotional about it because like people been criticized for that. Like, don't go to a restaurant. I'm like, look, I am going to go because I also
Hmm.
have a thing called mental health
Yeah.
and a marriage, and I am not willing to let those things slip and slide.
Hmm.
So I think it's really important and healthy. And there's ways you can do it. You can have a date in your own house if you want to lock the kids in a room. And I
Hmm.
don't know, there's other ways. But for us, it's like we know what we can do, and we're actively being as safe as we can. And
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
Do the best you can and do that. Do your self-care, you do your work on your marriage, work with your kids.
Yeah.
How have the kids come through everything with your mom and things like that?
Um, they're good. Each kid is a little bit different depending on how where they're at maturity wise. Actually, the baby is the one that misses her the most because
Hmm.
she was the closest with my mom because she didn't understand if like my mom swore or started undressing. So my mom in that phase, I talk about it in my book about dementia where she doesn't
Hmm.
keep her clothes on, she's not making a lot of sense when she talks, she doesn't really, she's in her body but she's not really living, and
Yeah.
that's a really difficult process to walk through. So the baby who's now just turned 8, she can
Jeez.
like hang with grandma. And she's like, that's okay. Grandma, like, put your sweater back on. That's all right. Whereas the 14-year-old's mortified. She's like, Mom, don't make me go back in there. So, so I don't, but the
Yeah.
underlining, like the takeaway for the girls is that they know that their grandma loves them. They know all of the struggles been with me through the walk with the book. So
Yeah.
and when I do a podcast like this, I let them listen to it so they
Hmm.
understand it. I don't hold that away from them. Again, it goes back to having these conversations, some of the tough conversations about it. Some of my kids have
Hmm.
anxiety as well.
Yeah.
And there's like a myth that kids don't have anxiety.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from, but
Yeah.
it's false. Like, kids have it. So then I say, this is what I do when I have anxiety.
Hmm.
Sometimes I put on music, I have to distract myself. And so I kind of normalize it for them versus telling them, no, they don't have it.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Or
You're
you
fine.
should feel, telling them what they should feel or something like that
Yeah.
instead.
That
Yeah.
never makes you feel good when someone says, no, you don't feel that way. You're fine. Move
Yeah.
on. It's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. I do feel this way. I had a daughter that had a panic attack out on the tennis courts because there was a storm coming in and the rain was coming down, and she felt responsible for her little sister. And when she went to open the door wouldn't open. And in
Mm.
that moment, she like envisioned like the lightning,
Yeah.
killing them. And she had this panic. And then for 2, 3 years, I couldn't get her to go out if it was overcast. So we had to deal
Wow.
through that.
Yeah.
Kids go through it as well. Like, mental
Hmm.
health is so important. And no one talks about it. No one says, okay, this is what you do when your child has a panic attack.
Hmm.
So I just thought, okay, this is what Past Challenges is about. We're going to talk about that. We're going to
Yeah.
talk about kids and anxiety. We're going to talk about our own anxiety because Lord knows I don't want to talk about my own anxiety.
I don't have any of that. No, not at all. But yeah. So any last words that you wanted to add? Anything you want to close with?
Um, Okay, two things. I always say this, and it's important to say. If you're listening to this and you have mental health issues or mental illness, you are not a lost cause. Um, my mom had a little thing on her TV. It was a bunch of different nuts, like almonds, peanuts, and then it said, "We're all a little nuts." So true.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's that. We all have it. We have to, as a society, be responsible in helping our friends and family that suffer from it and say, hey, you're not alone. I'm here for you. Um,
Hmm.
when can I check back with you? Can I give you a call next week? That's important. The second thing that I want to leave your viewers with is this awareness that we need to do more for people that are in between, for people that, and I 100% am for people living independently,
Hmm.
but that's not for everyone. Some
Yeah.
people really need help. They really need someone to help them arrange their medication so they take it properly, so they get a shower, so they can have a life of integrity. And
Hmm.
here in La Crosse County, we don't have enough housing. We don't have enough CBRS. And
Hmm.
many of them kind of are institutionalized. Like, I've looked at some of them and I'm like, I wouldn't want to live there.
Yeah.
I want to live in a home.
Yeah.
So we need to bring that back. And the problem is there isn't enough funding because in the 80s, they did it right. They had these homes that looked like houses,
Hmm.
and you could talk about God there. You could pray. You could sit around a table. And one of the most impactful things I ever witnessed as a 9-year-old when my mom was still rehabilitating was
Hmm.
I got to go and spend some time in a women's shelter. It was a CBRF where only women that were mentally ill lived, and there's probably like 8 of them. And they were there supporting each other, having meals together, some of the best like home cooked meals. Like, they made these baked
Hmm.
beans that were like out of this world. It had bacon in it. It was like,
Hmm.
that was like the first time I sat down at the table and had a meal with my mom. And so it was this sense of family and this sense of support.
Yeah.
And that impacted me so much that that's kind of my goal is I would like to move into creating more housing and
Okay.
creating an awareness. So talking about it, but then also saying, where can I start local? And then how can I repeat it in other counties? Because
Sure.
this isn't just a La Crosse problem or a Wisconsin
No,
problem
definitely not.
or
Yeah.
even a Midwest problem. This is like a world problem. This is a
Yeah.
big problem. I think that we all have the power to do small things. And so
Hmm.
That's where the Lord has been leading me. I don't know why, but he said, let's
You're not
let's
done
not
yet. You're not done yet. You got to do
not
more.
done.
Yep.
No. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. So thank you so much for opening up today and kind of sharing some of your
Mhm.
story. And I hope somebody finds something out of it and that they can use to help improve their own lives. And if there's anything, if they want to get in touch with you, I'll put links up to your Instagram page, your Facebook page as well, for your book, and they can get in touch with you on there and ask questions and get some support for the things that they're struggling with. But I think it's just inspirational to
Mhm.
see where you started when you were 7 and or before, and where you've gotten to today, and that it is possible to have a fulfilling life even with the struggles along the way. So thank you so much for everything today, Rebecca.
100%. Tony, thank you for having me. This
Yeah.
has been really fun to talk about, even though
Yep.
scary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
I
Thank
had a lot of
you.
fun.